Hi, my name is Dylan Birdsell. Currently a sports performance coach at Landau Performance. This is a presentation for my master's program, just talking about load management in professional sports. I kind of want to talk about an introduction to what load management is. Load management is a pretty controversial topic when it comes to the world of professional sports, and I think it's a little bit misunderstood. So I wanted to highlight the importance of it and what it really is. So we think about what is load management. Okay, so we just answer that question. What people think of it is they think of high-level athletes taking games off and sitting and quote unquote, just, being lazy or resting, or terms like being soft or thrown around. And I just really think this is a negative approach. That's not an honest one if we really think about it. Load management in sports is not a brand new thing. If we actually think about it, look at Major League Baseball. They've been doing load management for a long period of time. They do it a little bit differently because of the amount of games and the amount of physical stress that it causes on the body. You see this with their relief pitchers. You see this with their starting staff, where they are sitting their players and they're making marks of how many pitches they're throwing, what their bullpens look like, how many times they're getting up to throw their bullpens when they're going in versus not going in. They keep track of all these things, and what they're doing is they're managing the amount of physical stress that goes on the body from these games. And so that concept is now being taken over to other sports, or another sport such as basketball. Hockey's a little behind the times when it comes to their sports science stuff, and the NFL, well, we'll talk a little bit differently, but you can argue they really don't need to load management, just depending on of their schedule that they have, and they have certain advantages with their schedule that don't force them to do things like load manage. So that's just kind of what I wanted to throw out there. Now let's kind of go into it. So this is a general look of, or general definition essentially of what load management is and kind of the key characteristics behind it that I want to look at. So you'll see that Michael Drew and his team, they kind of wrote a narrative review over a bunch of different articles talking about load management. And we'll see the very first highlight where it says, it's monitoring training loads for injury prevention is to screen for those at increased risk of injury so that workloads can be adjusted to minimize these risks. Okay, so this is already showing that load management isn't just taking one random game in a month and saying that because he sat on this February date that he's fine in June. That's not what load management is. Load management is a process and a ever-going thing of different teams of people all looking and trying to make sure that they can eliminate the risk of injury, the risk of chronic fatigue as much as possible, trying to decrease the risk of overtraining. So that's the very first concept of what load management is. So we go to the second highlight. Secondary prevention involves screening for workloads that are known to precede an injury developing so that modification can be undertaken to mitigate this risk. Okay, so we start talking about different levels to what load management is. Talk about screening for workloads. Now, every athlete is going to have the same optimal amount of workouts or load of workouts. Everyone is a little bit different, and they're trying to get out ahead of these things. If you see someone and they have a risk factor for a specific injury that's relevant in their sport, say young female athletes and ACL tears, and you see their change of direction mechanics, you see their landing mechanics, you're like, wow, okay, something's not right there. We have to make sure that we target the specific muscle groups to make sure that the volume or the amount of load that they go into their games is not so high that it leads to injury. So that's another little highlight right there. When I think about the last one is prevention measures when implemented for asymptomatic individuals exhibiting possible injury risk factors are indicated for an athlete at the risk of developing a sports injury. 7 key indicated risks and associated prevention measures are proposed. Okay, so I really want to highlight right here, asymptomatic individuals. This is getting out in front of a problem when you can. Okay, there's a really toxic culture that I don't enjoy in our field or just athletics in general, where it's like the no pain, no gain type of approach, and that's really not the case. If anything, we should be eliminating pain as much as possible, because if we have pain, that's our body's way of showing us something is not right. And we have to be moving and functioning properly if we want to reach our highest levels of performance right there. So think about asymptomatic individuals looking and seeing what are those red flags and getting out in front of it. We talked about in the second highlight is looking at seeing what needs to be done to avoid the worst case scenario. So that's kind of what load management is in essence, is trying to take this day by day and make sure that this team of qualified individuals is making sure that our athletes are able to play at their highest potential, not just get out there and play, but to succeed. So we'll talk about stress. Stress is kind of the word I would rather use than load. There's different things we can do to change load, but when I think of load management, I think of stress management, because there are so many different things that can go into play to changing how our body reacts to stress. Okay, so let's talk about the very first highlight here, or bullet point, is body doesn't understand the differences between types of stress. Okay, we think about physical stress versus emotional stress. Okay, your body, these are all different types of reactions that are going to give your body a sympathetic response. Heart rate's going to go up, body temperature's going to go up. You know, all of these different hormones that are in our quote unquote fight or flight state, they all wind up appearing. It doesn't matter what the reason is for, but they are going to put the body in a heightened metabolic state, essentially. And so we got to be able to come down from those high levels of state for the body to recover. And if we're always in this stressful state, then that's where things start to go a little bit haywire. So let's talk about the types of stress, okay? So we got physical, we talked about, from like exercise components, and we're going to talk about with load, variable load down there, and those are called kind of the things that we can change about our exercise selection or programming to change the amount of physical stress you put on the body. Sickness, anything that causes your immune system to work harder, it is taking away from metabolic capabilities of doing other things, like when we are trying to exercise. Okay, anytime the body is removed from homeostasis, it is in a state where it's trying to recover from something. So imagine, next time you're sick in the bed and it's hard to get up, man, try to go squat something. You know what I mean? You'll see the amount of your rate of perceived exertion will go up so much more. Like, why is this not happening? And so being able to understand the highs and lows that the body's made for. The body is not made for PRs every single day. So understanding that and how to properly engage in activities, that way we're not putting too much harm on the body. Okay, we think about emotional. Okay, lifestyle changes. Think of family matters, relationships, pressure from society. Someone worried about whether they're going to get into college or not. Like now, pro levels is they got contracts and they're playing for money and they got families, and they're in social media. There are so many things that will go into emotion that will change and give you that same exact sympathetic response. And this is for longer periods of time. It's not just spikes of exercise and then comes right back down. If someone's dealing with mental health issues, then it's going to stay like that for quite a while. The brain chemistry is so important when it comes to the rest of the body functioning properly. Think about injury. We're going to dive really a lot more into this a little bit later, but injury is anytime that causes an inflammation response or anything that causes the body to, like I said, leave that homeostatic level. A lot of processes and healing mechanisms are going to go towards the body. If I sprained my ankle and there was inflammation there and there's bone bruising, like so much blood is rushed to the area with the healing properties that get carried inside the blood, and that's just going to take away from the rest of the body when we're trying to do something. And then sleep and nutrition. You can have the most perfect program in the world, but if you don't have control of your athlete's sleep and nutrition, then you never know if that's going to hinder things. Maybe they eat too bad and they wind up gaining too much weight, even though you're doing all this mechanical stress and you're in your hypertrophy ranges and all kinds of stuff. These are all things that are going to affect stress. These are all types of stress that are going to affect how the body's working that day. So let's think about things that are in our control and how we can try to define our volume or define our load that we are putting the athletes through. Weight, everyone knows this, and that's what really everyone looks at for the most part. And it's a really good marker of how much volume we have, but it shouldn't be the only thing. What if we're, say, a scenario where, say, you're the team strength coach and you're on a losing streak, okay, and you sit there and your program's good, and you're like, hey, you know what, we're like traveling a lot. I'm going to make sure that we don't lift a ton of weight this week. We're going to be at 50 to 60% ranges. It's going to be nice low reps. We're just trying to maintain our overall fitness levels that we have right here. And then at the end of the week, they're just smashed, and you're looking back at your program, and the only thing you're taking account is how much weight was actually lifted, and you're like, what? This doesn't make sense. It's like, well, if they're on a losing streak and the team coach thought that they needed to be punished and they needed to run for their negative mistakes in games, what happens if they're taking their whole practice times and they're sprinting up and down the court and they got so much volume on their legs, and you weren't aware of this and you went in and you still tried to do some long duration time under tension lifts, like tempo squats or something. Like there's a whole kinds of measures that are going to go into this that you have to kind of take account for if you truly want to understand what type of physical load or physical stress we're putting on the body. Talk about distance, how much distance is being covered in games and practices, time under tension, look at your exercise selection. Are you doing long time under tension things, or are you doing very quick things, or all different types of exercise modalities can go into play here. And think about the amount of foot contacts and specific movements. What if you have a return to play RTP athlete and you're sitting there and you're looking at them and it's like, cool, they're coming back from ACL injury and you're looking at how many cuts that they need to do in a game. If you don't look at that and you don't think about the load that they're doing, what if they haven't cut in 9 months and then they get cleared from their PT and they can just go try to play basketball right away? And it's like, shoot, well, they just had 60 cuts in one day off that one knee when they had 9 months of not doing any single, full speed dynamic movement like that. That's going to react differently. So you have to be able to know that. You have to be able to look at these things under certain situations, be like, how many cuts are they doing? How many jumps are they doing? How many times are they getting in and out off the line, if they're alignment in football, like all kinds of stuff that can go into load. And we can kind of try to look at that and try to help understand what our athletes' bodies are actually feeling like. Intensity, frequency, and duration of sessions, these are all three major things, are pretty easy things when it comes to the logistics of our programs that we can kind of control. That will help taper these things down. But they're not the only things. That's just what I wanted to highlight. So let's talk about the variables of stress. So the variables of stress is different than types of stress, okay? The variables of stress are some of these things that they go into how our body reacts to, like, physical stress, if that makes sense. Or they should be things that will give us a better understanding of their starting levels and baselines of what their fatigue levels are, what their fitness levels are. Okay, so we think about competitive schedule. Okay, so on our next slide, you'll see a couple slides, you'll see we're going to go over the competitive schedule. But yeah, that's really important. How you approach 1 week where you have one game on Friday is going to be completely different than if you have a tournament Thursday through Sunday and you're playing 2 games every day. It's the amount of stress that's going to happen. It's going to affect your program before this. Excuse me. It's going to affect your programming before the tournament. It's going to affect your programming after the tournament. Okay, those are things you got to take precaution of and understand. And you'll see with the different sports is how many peaks do you actually have to have in a year. Are you an Olympic athlete and you only have 1 peak every 4 years? Let's look at role of the team. If I'm sitting here and I'm training, I have the best player in the whole conference, the whole league. They're taking the most shots. They're getting the most points. They're running the most. They have the most minutes played in practice and in the game. Guess what? Like, they're already at their significant level of fitness that they need to do to succeed at that level. So I don't need to improve that in this moment. Okay? Now, if that's one of their KPIs that will take them even to the next level, that might be a little bit different. But that's a fine line you got to start worrying about in season. But now let's take that guy versus the 15th man off the bench, the last guy on the team, and the only reason why he's not playing might be athletic qualities. What if he's not strong enough? What if he's not fast enough? Well, if that's the case, and I have a good relationship with the coach, and I talk to him, he's like, yeah, so-and-so's not going to play really a whole lot this season. It's like, shoot, then that's my time to change my program and give him more high-intensity loads in the weight room. It's okay if his body's sore on game day because I already have the preconceived notion that he is not going to play and the clarification from the team coach of that. Think about minutes played versus minutes practiced. Same kind of thing going in the role of the team. You just got to look and understand what a player's role in that team is and what they actually need to succeed. This is where the specification of training comes in. It's not only what sport do they play, but what is their role, what is the importance, what is their key performance indicator, their KPI of how to succeed in this moment. Think of type of practice. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's like, is it a practice? Is it a tactile practice where it's a walkthrough, they're going over their plays, nothing easy, they're not hitting high speeds at all, and say you got a couple of days before the game, that might be a target date where it's like, cool, let's get in the weight room, let's work them because they don't have this stress. So you might be able to do things in that session that you haven't been able to do before when they're walking in, their legs are smashed. Or is it a technique type practice where they're running a lot, they got a ton of drills and a lot of cuts, and they're coming in, it's like, okay, we got to gain strength. At the same time, too, is, we're not going to get the same amount of intensity that we need, like on our jumps and on our sprints, so we might not be able to work that. Travel schedule. Travel schedule is huge, okay? Because travel schedule, when you're traveling, we've all felt it when we travel. Your lifestyle changes when you travel. Even for these teams that are on private jets, okay, it's going to mess their sleep schedule up. They got red-eye flights. It's going to mess their nutrition up. Maybe they're over-caffeinated compared to normal. Maybe they're eating more junk because it's quick, easy, on-the-go foods, okay? Maybe it's all kinds of things that are happening. In travel, they might be changing time zones. They might be playing back-to-back. And travel is a type of stress in general. Think about it. We all feel stressed when we travel. And we think about going back to what stress in general, okay? Just stress in general. Don't worry about fatigue from games, minutes, just stress. Now let's go with sleep and nutrition. We kind of talked about this already. If your program's not right and your athlete doesn't do the other things they need to do in their different levels of life to overcome this, then it's just not going to work sometimes. Saturation of stress and overall fitness levels. These are both really important things that have talked about a little bit earlier with the athlete that might be RTP from an ACL injury, and it's like, shoot, they probably haven't ran a lot. The first time they get out there and they run a suicide or two, it's going to be completely different responses to stress as the athlete that's already 5 weeks into their season. So in our field, that's important for us to gauge and to make sure that we hit these significant levels of improving the fitness level of the athlete. If they're in season and I give an athlete a brand new exercise they've never done before, it's going to induce a little bit of stress. Maybe they've hit body, muscle groups that they're not used to hitting that high of intensity. And now they're going into game day and it's like, man, my shoulders are still sore from the overhead press we did, or from the overhead press, and maybe they don't have the shoulder mobility for that, and we didn't know that, and we just threw it in there because we're like, oh, let's do this. We haven't done it in a while. It's like there are all different types of variables we got to look at this because it's going to affect how much physical stress on the body we actually do. So let's talk about the supercompensation versus the fitness fatigue model. Okay, try not to get on the soapbox here, but personally, I think the supercompensation model might be a little too simplistic. I understand the concept and how it's telling the body, how it's teaching us how the body goes and dips and it comes back with adaptation. But that's really, it's not as simplistic as that. As we just talked about all these different variables of stress, and we talked about the types of stress. Okay, and every time you see these charts, they always talk about base level or homeostatic level, and it's like, man, are we really at homeostatic level a lot? Maybe, maybe not. And it's like, is that really how the body responds and works every single time we exercise? And I would argue no, because there's too many variables, there's too many factors. That's why I look at right here, this is basically saying Every single time we introduce a stimulus to the body, boom, this goes like this. And it's like, well, maybe not, because what if they're overtrained or something? And it's like, this is going to dip more and it's not going to raise as much. Does our baseline level change every single time we're ready to introduce a new stress? I don't know. So that's why I like to go with the fitness fatigue model. You got this over here. You think about fitness. This is how our body feels that day, overall, just athletic qualities. And this is fatigue. Fatigue's pretty self-explanatory. Fitness and fatigue have an inverse relationship. The higher fatigue goes, the lower fitness is going to go. Preparedness to achieve a task, okay, is not the same as fitness. Fitness is how our body actually feels. Preparedness is, are we ready to perform? Those are different things, and preparedness is kind of like an average of these two things. And you'll see a little bit later, if fatigue gets too high, fitness gets too low, our preparedness is going to dip. So let's go back to competitive schedule. I already talked about this a little bit, but don't want to hit it. I don't want to go too long on this. But essentially, think about what sport are you doing, and think about how intense games are. Games are not practices where you kind of just get to pick and choose when you go fast. You're probably going fast all the time. There's a lot of cuts. There's a lot of jumps. There's a lot of impact that's going to happen, and that induces a different type of stress than you feel. Think about how much people's body hurts after just working out 3 times a week or 4 times a week. They're probably always sore, probably a little tired, blah, blah, blah. Now imagine that was heightened, because those are just training sessions in comparison to our competitive sessions that we have while we're in games. Think about baseball. 6 to 7 games per week, and they're traveling on that. Okay, so we already talked about this. They're on the road, eating, sleeping different, maybe, traveling, different time zones maybe, a lot of games in the sun, outside variables potentially in the summer. That's going to change. It's going to change our baseline level of fitness. The NFL, think about how much more positives or pros come from the 17-game schedule where they only got to play once or twice a week. This means on Sundays, usually, that means I got to peak on Sunday. So that means Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they have a plan. Maybe it's a rest day after Sunday. Maybe they're getting in there for a light lift after Sunday on Monday. Friday, Saturday, it's like, boom, we're going to kick it into high gear, and we're going to push the body to maintain our overall fitness levels. Because you know what, on Saturday, we know we're not going to do a whole lot. That might be our walkthrough. It's like, hey, maybe we have travel, but we get to travel on Thursday this week, and we get to have 2 full days before we ever even have to play our game. And it's like the NBA, MLB, they're playing back-to-backs. No matter how nice your private jet is, no one wants to fly at 3 o'clock or land at 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up, have to get to their hotel, and not fall back to sleep till 5. These things are real. Think about MMA fighters. MMA fighters are a little bit different. You know, if you have the top of the line athlete, they might only fight like 3 or 4 times a year because they get to pick their fights. They get to have their camp. They get to choose when they fight. What if you got a brand new guy that's on the roster and he's trying to make a name for himself and he takes any fight? He's fighting 7 times in 1 year because there's injuries and stuff like that happen. You can't program for that. You can't plan for that. But he just wants to make money. He wants to get his name heard, so you just have to make sure you go with the punches. You know, no pun intended, but anything about Olympic athletes? Maybe they only got to peak for maybe you think they only got to peak for the Olympics, but they got qualifiers too. They got other events. These are competitive people. It's not like they just sit around for 3.5 years and then like, all right, let's start training for the Olympics. It's like, no, they're competitive people. They have other meets. They're doing other stuff. It's like you got to understand their peaks and when they need to, when they don't need to, how to manage stress. 4 years is a long time, long time to train for one event. And that's going to introduce its own challenges to itself. That's for a different video. So we want to highlight this little passage from this research paper right here, relationship preseason training load with season biochemical markers, injuries, and performance of professional soccer players. Okay, in this study, they actually did not find a positive correlation or a significant difference between the biochemical markers and injuries in the season, but they did reference quite a few other studies that show all of the things that they were trying to prove. And I just wanted to read a passage right here from it. So several studies show that intensified training or mass exposure could influence the increase of inflammation and muscle damage markers. Okay? Match exposure, intensified training. Think about how many times per week. Think about the fitness levels and the fatigue levels, that this is all changing. This is always adapting, always adapting. We don't get to sit right here at our base level all the time. And I'll show you how the fitness fatigue model changes here in a little bit. In this regard, the first training session of the off-season may introduce microtrauma, muscle damage, structural and contractile components within the muscle fiber. We all felt DOMS before. We all felt what it's like to have to that first weight room session when you haven't trained in a long time. This again results in increased LDH and may affect players' perceived exertion. Okay? Players' true perceived exertion, guess what? It's their perceived exertion. Okay? It's because their body is not in prime state for that day. So that time you squat them for 225 one day and it's a 9 out of 10 because they're exhausted, versus the time that after a taper and they put 225 on their back and they're like, shoot, this is easy. This is like a 4 out of 10. Those have different stresses and responses on the body. It's not just load. It's not just weight. It's how the body responds to that 225, which gives us our load that we're trying to manage. Even intensity training was kept rather low during this early stage of the season. It is well known that running speeds, accelerations, and decelerations over a certain magnitude and over a certain period of time may induce muscle inflammation. Okay? May induce muscle inflammation, running speeds, acceleration, decelerations. When are we always going fast? We're always going fast in games. 3 to 4 times a week? 6 to 7 times a week? Giving us inflammation response. We already talked about inflammation. It takes away recovery modalities to the rest of the body. This is all high stresses that our body's having. Roller coaster. But over time, not enough rest, it stops getting as high. It just goes lower and lower and lower and lower with little peaks. Talk about this right here, okay? This is I don't know where I got this, just some famous artist. Beautiful masterpiece. No, this was one. And so I want to talk about the fitness fatigue model, and let's talk about what it looks like after multiple stresses, not just the one exercise. We see over here on the left side, we see what the one exercise looks like. It's like, now this is not the perfect illustration, but you'll see it during this first workout, this little black vertical line, that's basically the difference of our first and second exercise, essentially. Completion of exercise or training session. So we see fitness goes down because fatigue's going to rise. But guess what? You get a little bit of rest, fatigue starts a little bit lower than what it ended at that exercise session. Fitness, a little bit of rest, it starts a little bit higher. But let's look at these starting points now. Okay? This is with rest, because we can't always just get rid of full fatigue. Okay? Unless this is like, I don't know, like workouts 3 or 4 days apart, but at the same time too, is like these are pro athletes. They're not doing that. Any athlete's not doing that. Not consistently. So we think about fitness. Hey, it rose back up. But guess what? It's not nearly as high as this first time. Let's look at fatigue. Hey, fatigue went down. Oh, but fatigue's still a little bit higher than that very first exercise or training session when we were fresh. Look at preparedness. Preparedness. Boom. Dipped a little bit. Started to rise again through the second exercise session. And guess what? We had a little bit of adaptation. A little bit of a raise from here, right below the black line, to here, right on the black line. Because we had proper rest. Now, these levels weren't the exact same, but our preparedness for a task was higher because we got proper adaptation. Now, let's look over here with lack of rest or lack of preparation. We got multiple workouts here with these black lines. This first workout, everything goes like normal. Fatigue goes up. Fitness goes down. Preparedness goes up. Uh-oh. Didn't get a lot of rest. Fatigue continues to rise. Fitness continues to lower. Our preparedness starts to get worse. What if we're going again? Fatigue is still rising. We're not getting any dips in this. Fitness is still going down. It's not as pretty as our supercompensation theory was a whoop, whoop, whoop. Our body is going to react differently and exponentially when it follows certain patterns and trends. Let's look at injury. Jamal Murray all-star level point guard in the NBA for the Denver Nuggets, had an ACL tear last year. Okay, and one thing to know about the 2020-2021 season for basketball was it was coming off a shortened off season. Normally they get about 6 months for their off season. This one's coming off about 3 months, 3.5 months. Might even been less than that. And because there's a whole COVID and schedule change and all this stuff, so they try to rush through a season. Well, sometimes players or traumatic events when it comes to injury gets deemed as unlucky. And it's like, maybe sometimes, maybe contact injuries. His injury was not contact. We think about load management. We think about the body being able to take tons and tons and tons of cuts. His torn ACL came off a decel, a 2-foot decel. Now, there was a little bit of contact, but it came off a 2-foot decel. So let's look at this injury history just from this one season. And Jamal Murray was actually a pretty healthy guy in general. From his first 3 seasons, he didn't really miss a ton of games. This was the first year that he actually started to feel this. When we think about lack of time to recover in the offseason, think about now, look at all these incidents that happened. 7/31, this was the season before last, but we'll still look at it because you never know. There might have been lingering effects. And one last thing I do want to say is I wish this would show us which side of the body it happened, but that's okay because ultimately we think about stress in general and how when you have one injury, all your healing processes might go to that and the rest of the body might be a little bit left behind. Not crazy, but just a little bit. We'll see how many times this actually happens. So we think about the hamstring. Okay? He still played for about another month after this hamstring injury. He only sat a little bit. He still went out and tried to play. He rushed back. Okay? This was like the season opener. They started like right around Christmas. Calf injury right away. Right off the bat. Probably trying to heighten up the amount of high intensity, high impact movements he's trying to do. Okay? 5 days later, elbow pain. The elbow and the calf, are they really connected? Maybe. Maybe not. Probably not. When we start thinking about, but you never know, because what if the calf's hurting and he can't get enough lift in his legs, so now he's trying to change the way that he dribbles and he moves and he shoots. And that causes the elbow to go into a funky motion that he doesn't like. I mean, it might be subtle every single time. Subtle changes when it's not proper will induce stress, okay? The saying we like to say at Landau, but it's like joint position dictates muscle function, okay? Even from changing from my hand being supinated to pronated, it's going to change my bicep activation, just for an example. So anytime we change any little thing, it changes muscle activation. Okay, so keep going forward. 12/29, 1:30. Okay. About a month later, got a shoulder injury. Maybe the shoulder and the elbow, they're connected. That's an open chain right there between, specific tissues and muscles. Joints that rely on each other to be moving properly, for them to move properly. This is where it starts to get interesting. A week later, he's got a knee injury. Another week later, 8 days later, he has an ankle injury. And this ankle injury was actually big. It held him out for a couple weeks. 2-month period for an athlete who's never been hurt really much this whole entire season. Boom. Stress. Gets down to 4/6. Another knee injury. Now, I am positive that this knee injury was the same side as a week later, tears his ACL. This is what load management is trying to prevent. It's not 100%, but it's trying to get out in front of as many injuries as possible. And you could say they probably even rushed this, maybe. I wasn't in the room. I don't know. I'm just saying this is an example of a potential situation that happened. So it's important to look at these things, and it's important to make sure we understand load and what we're trying to fix. Sorry, my jacket's lit off my chair. It really scared me. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is just monitoring. How they monitor load. Okay, there's all kinds of technologies and things that are really cool, but the very first thing we think about is wearables. We all have wearables. I got my Apple Watch on right now, and athletes use them, and there's really cool programs that allow athletes to share information with their teams, with their nutritionists, with their sleep coaches, with their physical therapists and strength coaches. There's a lot of tracking that goes into this. These guys are paid millions of dollars, okay? That's a lot of investment. And these teams are trying to do everything they can to protect the investment and to try to win at the highest level. Think about sleep trackers and apps. We all know sleep is so important, but we talking about travel and messes up our circadian rhythm and getting in and out of REM and all kinds of stuff, changes of altitude, changes of humidity and the environment. There's so much stuff that goes into play here. Think about GPS, okay? GPS is really cool. One of the best examples I have of GPS working is, I was fortunate to listen to strength coach of the Broncos, Lauren Landau, and he talked about how they measure their top speeds that they hit at practice, how many times they hit these top speeds. And if those numbers don't match up to what they need to go into a game, then you got to change your conditioning for these guys. Not every conditioning is go run a mile as much as possible. Conditioning is like, hey, we're going to get as many high-intensity reps as possible at these speeds so we can get the tissue tolerance that has to happen at the muscular level so we can maintain integrity. GPS, they have chest plates, they have chips and shoes, they have all kinds of stuff that's really, really cool that allows them to get a lot more information that we can never know. Last thing we think about talk about is force plates. Force plates is just another example of some type of monitoring. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do on this. You can look at concentric and eccentric forces of different tissues and what's happening. You can look at asymmetrical balances between your left and your right foot and see if there's anything, because that could tell you something. If they feel like they're fine, and then you look, and it's like one side's way stronger than the other, and you start asking questions like, hey, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, yeah, my knee felt funny the other day when I made a cut and popped. Or maybe not popped, but it's like it just felt funny. It's like, oh, okay. And you start looking at how they exercise and how they move, and say, okay, something is off here. I come from a single number, starting to lead how the story gets told. Force plates are really cool. Strength coach in Notre Dame, got the privilege of speaking with her, and she talked about how they use force plates to look at the eccentric stress of their athletes when they land. Shows their braking forces, and that, based off of their baseline levels when they test them when they refresh, tells them, hey, what kind of zone are we in today? How does the body feel? Because if the body doesn't feel good, then I might not sit there and push you that hard, because we're not going to get the adaptation we want, because the body's not going to react to the stress the way we want it to. Doesn't mean the stress won't be there. It's not going to react and recover from the stress. That is a whole important thing. So that's pretty much what I got. Asked a few questions. Did you learn anything about new ways to look out for your athletes? What are some modalities or techniques that you have learned in your own experience that's helpful with understanding your athlete's quote-unquote preparedness for that day? Serious questions. Are you still not a fan of load management? Do you still think it's kind of hoaxy? Do you still think that players need to go play every single game just because they're paid for it? And if that's your opinion, then you are entitled to it. Obviously, that's not mine. I just went and talked 40 minutes about why we need to have load management, why it's important. But, I'd love to hear your answers. Please reach out if you have any questions at all. I'd love to continue this conversation. I'd love to continue learning, if there's ways that can enhance my information about this. These are my references, and this is pretty much all that I have. Thank you for listening, and I'll be seeing you guys around. See ya.